50 that are practically insolvent. That's a systemic problem. Okay, you cannot say that, hey, look, we're going to let 10 banks go bust. At the same time, it is also tricky to bail out 10 banks, and how are you going to do that? Where is the money going to come from? So this is the bad news. The good news, or not so bad news, is that banking crisis is nothing unique to Bangladesh. It has happened in many countries over many decades. There is a huge body of academic and policy literature. This is a technocratic problem with a technocratic solution, provided there is political will for the government. And it seems to me that the interim administration does have the political will. So that's the banking sector. That's the first thing, the first urgent priority. And this is also the one that you could see since the inception of new government. This is the one where they have moved the fastest. Second stability problem is with respect to inflation. Again, intuitively, we all get it, that inflation is bad. There's I don't need to belabor that point or bore anyone with that, okay? Here, the good news is that inflation has been declining or easing. Part of that is purely because of absence of various middlemen and the word they use in Bangladesh is syndicate, which is just basically local distribution oligarchies and so on, oligopolies and so on. So inflation has been declining, and the central bank governor says that he expects inflation to decline to about 7% from 10% that had been running last couple of years. The tricky thing probably would be to bring it down to something like 5%. And why do I say tricky thing? Because ultimately, inflation comes down to macroeconomic management, monetary policy and fiscal policy, coordination, and so on. And one significant issue there is that people who you need, so you need a credible central bank, and you need qualified people in the Ministry of Finance to advise the government to run these things. One of the striking, at least to me, a striking thing that happened after the revolution, after the fall of Hasina, was that the central bank governor and two deputy governors fled or were chased away, right? And this is striking because these are technocratic posts, right? Even on 17th of December, 1971, when Dhaka was liberated, the central bank governors, central bank officials in then East Pakistan turned Bangladesh, they showed up on 17th of December and they went to office and they asked the Indian commanders, said, okay, who's in charge? Because we have an economy to run. Here we had the governor ran away. So this is, these top ministries need people to actually run the machinery of government and so on. So that's just a side note on the inflation point. Okay. Third thing that we need for macro stability, we need external sector stability. Again, the idea here is that the currency needs to be stable and the reserves needs to be stable. So that's there's confidence that this is a country that can pay its bills. The good news here is something that Dr. Rumi Khan, the chart that he showed, and therefore preempts something I was going to say, which is that remittances have flown very strongly since the revolution. If we go back last couple of years, from mid-22 until now, until the revolution, for a couple of years, remittances actually had been very sluggish. Despite the fact that record number of people had been leaving Bangladesh to go for work, and the fact that the destination country labor markets, whether that's in the West or in the Gulf, had been running hot. Okay, wages had been very strong in the labor markets, destination labor markets. So by all accounts, remittances should have been booming before the revolution, but they weren't. And the reason for that was that the remitters had an expectation that Taka dollar exchange rate was on a depreciating slide. Okay. Now, if you think that your currency is going to depreciate, you would not want to change, you would not want to remit through formal channel because there are alternative informal hundi and hawala and these channels. And those channels were being sustained by capital flight from Bangladesh. Okay, so this was the nexus that was before the revolution. And that created a vicious cycle. You expect Taka to depreciate, you don't remit through formal channel, therefore the foreign currency does not come in through formal channel, therefore that creates a that exacerbates, aggravates the currency problem, reserves bleed, and so on, right? There is a good possibility that this is reversed now, okay? At least if the last few weeks of remittance flows are sustained. Another good news or possible good news is that there are strong signals from the IMF and other multilaterals and Western governments of economic support, whether in form of a crisis program with the IMF or support from World Bank or ADB or other donors, right? So that should also help assuage any concerns about external sustainability, external financing, okay? The dark cloud here, and I think this is what Ms. Hawk is going to talk about, is the garments, okay? So that's the other big foreign currency earner, and we know that there are problems in that sector. So I'd leave Ms. Hawk to talk about those things, about the garment sector. Moving into medium term and stability. So even before the crisis, even before the revolution, even before pandemic, Bangladesh was actually running a current account deficit. And the old program that Bangladesh had with the IMF was projecting that that the current account deficit would continue until the end of the decade. So current account deficit, and I'm sorry, this is getting a bit technical for the general audience, but bear with me. So basically, current account deficit over a long period of time means that a country is investing more than it can save. So it's investing in things, and it cannot meet that investment demand from its own domestic savings. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If this investment is going to productive things, then that means that, like in the longer run, the economy is going to be more productive. It will grow faster, and then you can pay off your loans. It's kind of like, if you want to take a student loan, get an education, get a good job, pay off your loan. You can think of it that way. The question about Bangladesh's current account deficit was that these investments were not in the private sector. These were mostly public sector investment, public investment in big projects. Those projects may have a good rate of return, infrastructure projects and energy projects. They may not. We don't know. Many of the terms of financing for many of those projects were extremely murky and questionable. Okay, so maybe there were good projects that were financed properly, but most of them were not financed properly. Some of them may not have the rate of return that you'd hope. Okay, so this was the case before.
Jyoti, sorry to interrupt. Just to keep the conversation going, maybe we can do a second round on this topic.
Sure, I'll just have one more minute to finish. Is that all right?
Sure.
Yes, sure. Okay. So, now, three things, right? External financing or, external problems, bad banks, and authoritarian politics, okay? this was sort of we had the Monsoon Revolution, but long time ago, there was a Monsoon crisis, Asian crisis back in 1997. These were the three things that created the cocktail, that created the crisis in Southeast Asia back in 1997. Okay, we have avoided that authoritarian politics. We have moved beyond that, but we still have the bad bank and the external deficit, those two problems. So the challenge is to solve those two problems in a democratic environment. Okay, I'll stop and
thank you. Thank you very much. So let me keep it on the macro side and turn to Nehad Chowdhury next. And he's had a wealth of experience throughout his career working in international capital markets, both in the private sector as well as institutions like IMF, right? So Nehad, it would be really helpful for our audience, most of whom are either Bangladeshi or in Bangladesh, right, to get a sense of how the international capital markets perceive risks, right? And whether what's happened in the last month, right, that has that changed the outlook on Bangladesh? Has that imposed new risks, right? And how should we be thinking about mitigating those risks? So what are the, maybe also what we should talk about is what our current government, the interim government should be doing to make international financial markets feel more comfortable.
Thank you, Mushfiq. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes, you.
Terrific. Thank you. So I'll just preface my remarks by first saying that, whatever I communicate reflects my own personal views and not the views of Citigroup or its management. Now, with that, I want to emphasize, I'll do two things. First of all, emphasize a few of the things that actually Jyoti mentioned, and there'll be a few phrases that I'll use repeatedly for that emphasis and reiteration. But I'll also try and provide an important context for where Bangladesh is today and how investors, when they think about the investment thesis for Bangladesh, what are they really anchoring that investment thesis to, and what are the types of issues that they look at? So some of my comments aren't even specifically about Bangladesh, but when you compare Bangladesh to the global universe of emerging and frontier markets, it's how they think about those things. So the three phrases that I'll use repeatedly are track record, predictability, and the forward-looking continuity that predictability enshrines. And again, to reiterate what Jyoti said, if you look at the demarcation for Bangladesh, that demarcation from an economic performance standpoint was 2021. And the world actually changed dramatically post-2021. And Bangladesh actually reflects a lot of the experiences of many countries in EM and frontier markets that have gone through that. But if you look at the pre-2021, again, now the track record of Bangladesh, what investors would have looked at is the growth rates, the volatility around those growth rates, price stability, exchange rate stability, the fact that Bangladesh was a low-cost human capital environment for investment. And when they look at that track record, they would also look at the historic resilience to prior shocks, whether they were domestic shocks or exogenous shocks. So whether you look at the 08-09 global financial crisis, which happened to coincide with domestic transition in Bangladesh that was also somewhat abrupt, investors would look at, well, how did all of those indicators perform at that time? And were asset prices and the outcomes relatively stable and exhibit low volatility? Similarly, even during the pandemic, if you look at Bangladesh's performance, it's fairly impressive when you compare it to the volatility of its markets and the main macro indicators during that time. Now, as Jyoti mentioned, something changed in 2022 and 2023, and a lot of those were the spillovers from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which roiled commodity markets around the world. So Bangladesh, like many other emerging markets, is a net importer of many commodities, and that added obvious pressure to the external accounts. And then subsequent to that, we had an unprecedented tightening of global financial conditions because of what the Federal Reserve in the US and the ECB embarked on in terms of their exit from quantitative easings. And it's not obvious that these things impact countries with an immediate time horizon. There's usually a lag for some of these things, and these pressures also accumulate over time. So the global context for what Bangladesh is now navigating is very different from what it was from that economic standpoint. And then from a geopolitical standpoint, also the inflection point is very different compared to anything that the country has experienced before. So again, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the rising tensions between the United States and China, these have put many countries in the crosshairs of the dislocations from those kinds of tectonic shifts in the geopolitical landscape. And that's also something that Bangladesh is, I think, fairly uniquely has to navigate, along with other countries in between China, the US, and I'd put even India into that mix. So when investors are now looking for, on a forward-looking basis, the predictability and the continuity, what they want to see is, again, now back to Jyoti's point, is number one, the near-term macro stabilization following these very severe shocks that the economy has gone through. And then on a medium-term basis, what are the deeper structural reforms that then inform that longer-term investment thesis for Bangladesh? So what are those comparative advantages that Bangladesh has exhibited in the past? And is the leadership, whether it's the interim government or successive governments, do they articulate a vision for how they're going to maintain that level or improve that level of competitiveness going forward? So let me pause there, Mushfiq, and I can add on to that, but I want to give others a chance to opine before I talk more about the forward-looking.
No, thanks so much. No, that is a very good stopping point. So, and we'll come back and ask the second question again, Nehad. Thank you. So let me now do a little bit of a transition from the macro to more micro issues. So we have two more speakers. And I'll ask Ms. Rubana Haq to provide the perspective of the domestic business and private sector, right? So especially because, I mean, I invited her, especially because the ready-made garments industry is a very important stakeholder for the Bangladesh economy. And, you know, we can imagine some near-term risks. Of course, I'm not in the private sector. I don't know exactly what those risks are, but I can imagine that, you know, our buyers such as Walmart and H&M, right? They are going to be concerned right now about our ability to deliver, right? It might also change sort of international trade and business transactions, people's willingness to work on credit, right? So these are all costs of doing business that might have gotten more complicated for our business sector. And I wonder if we could get your perspective on that, Ms. Rubana.
Thank you, Mushfiq. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, all right, okay. So Bangladesh has always been uniquely positioned to be the most competitive export hub in South Asia. Now, interestingly, the ready-made garment sector has also been the easiest target of all. So every time there is a change, every time there's a shock, the garment sector basically absorbs it. And quite interestingly, very often, like what happened earlier, 15 years and also before, many data that we see are not authentic. So as a result, there is, of course, lack of transparency with data. There are gaps in export figures. There are many a times a lot of turbulence that hits the sector, but we somehow, from within the community, we mute ourselves. It's like self-censorship. And this has been a chronic problem. At this point of time, Mushfiq, with all that's going on, even yesterday, there were more than 250 factories closed. And buyers are shifting the orders left, right, and center. And we can't blame them, because the least that they can expect from us at this point is stability. Where is stability in the sector is a very big question for many of us. Totally unprotected. Literally, I mean, of course, there is industrial police, there's army out there. But the point is, we are probably looking at the symptoms and not looking at the cause. So I'm sure everyone's kind of curious to know what the cause is, why the shock. I mean, minimum wage, and I'm not being defensive, Mushfiq. There is no way I'm going to be defensive about the sector. But I am going to say this, that the minimum wage was revised just in December. Why suddenly, after the 5th of August, all of a sudden, every factory just, kept on having outsiders come in and basically impact also the internal atmosphere of every factory. And then, we mostly had to close down. Okay, a couple of us were lucky enough not to be subjected to that, but we were only a handful, especially with Ashulia and Gazipur. Gazipur, a little less, but Ashulia has always been a ticking bomb for the garment sector. And many big factories, Mushfiq, are in Ashulia. So when the official statement goes that 98% of the factories are open or were open till 2 p.m., this is just a hogwash. Because in Ashulia, one factory literally employs workers at least 30,000, 40,000. And then what happens? What is the impact of closure? Now, there's extreme pressure from all sides. Number one, the buyer is constantly chasing us, of course, for on-time shipment. And as much as they would like to sympathize with us, let's just face it, the market isn't going to wait for us. The shops are not going to be waiting for us. So what do we do then? Even if the buyers love our performance and our extremely competitive price, and I'm saying it with a dose of sarcasm, even then that love affair is not going to last. And there is nothing called temporary shift of orders. When once the buyer leaves the country, the market shifts. There's nothing called the order has actually only left us for 2 months. That's not right. It has left us. And we are experiencing 15 to 20% shift in orders. It's just not about H&M. It is not about Walmart. There are so many other buyers all around the globe. And I just received word from one of my Spanish buyers. They have just cut down on business, and they're only placing 1/3 of the quantity that they used to place, and they're moving to guess where? Pakistan, India, Cambodia, and even Myanmar. So my point is, why will we be always an easy target? Why will we not be able to serve our buyers to the best that we can? Number one, we have overcapacity, and the buyers take advantage of that. 100%. We fight against our next factory with our prices. If the next factory has offered $5, I'm most likely to go and offer 4.9. And then, the crazy competition continues. And this is how we have hurt each other. So one, we have literally no loyalty to the minimum FOB price, but also we don't stand together as a community. One, we don't stand together as a community. Number two, we are unable to convince our buyers about our worth. Therefore, the country concept of Bangladesh is always at a low. So if the buyer is giving Vietnam $12 for a suit, they'll be giving us $6 for the same one. So very interestingly, we have always gone just downward with prices. And we can't complain because the buyers, of course, choose markets and they have the liberty to do so. But the constant pressure on us for compliance, the constant pressure also internally on us for doing better is also a trigger button that we can't handle anymore. It's a trigger which is unhealthy for us because we can't anymore invest here. So I will stop there, Mushfiq. If you want me to go on, I'll happily go on, but I'm not timing myself. So I'll leave it on your judgment.
Thanks very much for staying on time. So the fourth person in the panel, Mr. Abdullah Seck, who's the World Bank Country Director for Bangladesh and Bhutan. So I'll ask him to talk a little bit more about the micros. So we just heard from industry and macroeconomists, but ultimately we will need to, for industry to work, we need to invest in our people. Right? Human capital is going to be critical. So what are the new opportunities that you see for our citizens' futures? What are the risks that you see of this big political transition that we just went through, right? Given the massive political upheaval? And what types of interventions in people should we be prioritizing to maintain our competitiveness?
Thank you so much, Professor Mubarak. First of all, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, fantastic. I apologize for connecting late. I got the time wrong, perhaps. Look, I want to thank you so much first, I think, to you and Yale University for inviting me to this panel on behalf of the World Bank. So really appreciate that. And also, I should say that I feel very honored to join quite strong and amazing thinkers in this panel, along with, of course, those who have been part of the very special event we saw during the summer. So let me, first of all, start by really expressing my very sincere condolences to the people of Bangladesh. I think my thought really go to all of the people who did a lot of sacrifice. And for many of them, too many, it was the ultimate sacrifice. And I should say we should never, ever forget them. So you ask about risk and opportunities. I mean, clearly, there are so many challenges that could actually be related to what happened during the summer. But clearly, one of the triggers was about lack of opportunities, especially for young people. And if I may just give some statistics. You know, in Bangladesh, unemployment rate is about 5-6%. But for young people, it's a lot more, around 15 to 16%. And for young educated people, it's even higher. And so we do know that challenges, of course, go beyond those well-educated young men and women. We have seen recently in Dhaka how, for instance, government workers, graduate from vocational training schools, a lot of people really went out and protested about lack of opportunities. So what I would like to say is that the challenge of providing jobs to young people, is a huge challenge in Bangladesh. And one of the way to look at it is to consider perhaps those who may need support now, the workers of today, and look at the workers of tomorrow. I think that is a simple framework to help us going through this. When it comes to the workers of today, it could be also important to look at maybe three groups. The first group is the largest one. In Bangladesh, 2/3 of those in the labor market are self-employed people. So how do we do to ensure that those will be equipped with what is needed so they can create their enterprise, micro-enterprise, or household enterprise? It can be different things. It can be, of course, a seed capital. It could be training, but also one could look at how to ensure efficient digital payment system, for instance. The second group, obviously, will be those who will be looking at wage employment. It is important. You have SMEs, you have large enterprise, some of them led by my dear friend Rubana here. And so for those, what is important will be to look at the skills, how to make sure that between institutions that provide the skills and the firms and the market, there will be effort to ensure that young women and men are equipped with the skills that they need to enter the labor market. But I will say that one should also think at the benefit of economic migration. I think it has helped Bangladesh a lot. And it is an opportunity, I think, to pursue. That said, right now, it is associated with extremely high cost, whether it is a financial cost or transaction cost. And whether we consider public path to economic migration or private path, there is a need to do a lot of reforms. Now, let me talk about the jobs of tomorrow. And you mentioned about the opportunities, and where I will say, I want to start by talking about how Bangladesh should invest in its people. You know, I think trusting the young people of Bangladesh will deliver a lot. And let me just illustrate a little bit about what I mean by this. So we have this definition of a human capital index. What is today the potential that those kids born 18 years ago are achieving relative to a situation when they have seen no stunting, they have got best education, quality education, meaning basically 14 years of good quality education by age 18, and they have got good health care, so they can survive at the age of 60. So in Bangladesh, that potential is today achieved by only about 46%. And that is quite low. It tells basically that we are half of the potential of earnings that young people could have received. There, we know there are many factors driving this. Clearly, poor quality of education is one of them, and there are some indicators. If you look at, on average, how much of a young Bangladeshi could actually receive as years of education by age 18, is 11 years. But once you consider quality, it goes down to 6 years. Or another indicator is the following, which is quite a depressing one, actually, I should say. At age 10, about 58% only of, or rather 42% of young kids in Bangladesh are able to read and understand a simple story. And you know, we are in a global economy. If you have poor learning, you cannot get the skills that are needed to compete in the private sector that is globalized. So I think investing in people will be one of the key factors I think I would like to really put forward for the meeting today. But clearly there are issues that also need to be tackled. Some of them touched by my predecessors in the panel. Banking sector vulnerabilities must be tackled. Banks are a threat to economic stability, but more importantly, we would like to see banks being able to channel savings to productive investment. So that is quite important. Not to talk about the capital market, which is very shallow right now. And what does it mean? It means that we don't have opportunities to finance the like of housing or capital climate adaptation, for instance. The third part I would like to, perhaps third factor I would like to, in the long run, I would like to emphasize is trade reforms. I think trade reforms are extremely important and critical and urgent for Bangladesh. In my view, and I may be accused of oversimplification, but the reason why we don't have economic diversification today, the reason why exports are so low relative to many countries, is pretty much because you don't have high tariff and non-tariff barriers are even more excessive. So I think that reform on trade will help a lot, bringing in a new enterprise, new firms that could deliver millions of jobs. And the last point I would like to really encourage Bangladesh to consider, Professor, is on urbanization. I think Bangladesh is blessed with the highest density in the world. And that is obviously, to me, a very important factor, because basically through urbanization, one could achieve the benefit of agglomeration, and you can have diffusion of innovation, quite important. But the reality right now is totally the opposite in Bangladesh. In Dhaka, I think whether it is about pollution, whether it is about congestion cost, and that need to be addressed. How that will be addressed? Clearly, the governance of the cities is something that one needs to be looked at. So, latest data I have seen about a collection of revenue of $50 million in Dhaka is clearly something that need to be addressed. So how cities will be better governed, so they can collect more revenue, accountability to deliver services, improve environmental standing and standards in the country, I think will be extremely important. I would like to stop there. Happy to elaborate more during the conversation.
So Abdullah, thanks very much. So let me ask a quick round of follow-up questions to each of the panelists, and maybe we can get all four panelists on the screen together, if that's possible on the by the technical side. So what I'd like to, there's two things I'm missing from hearing this conversation. So one is the connection to the economic issues to the politics and the big political upheaval that we just experienced, right? These two things cannot be divorced from each other. So I'm going to try to push you on that. And the second thing, especially the macroeconomists on this panel, I'd like you to, I'm also seeing how people's eyes glaze over when we start talking about current accounts. So I want to force you to focus a little bit on practical stuff, almost mundane stuff, if you allow me. Yeah. So let me start, and please, all panelists, because we're going to be running short on time, time yourself, and maybe the responses should be 1 to 2 minutes. Yeah? So the first question I'll go in the same order. So I'll ask Jyoti. So one of the practical issues we're facing right now, as you pointed out, is that a lot of the technocrats left or were forced out for good reasons, right? We've seen evidence of a lot of stolen assets, just like direct theft from banks, right? People are responsible for it. Somebody did that stealing, and they've all left. But it also means that we have a challenge right now, which is that some skilled human capital has also left. When a central bank governor leaves, that also means something for the country. And if you look back in history, we saw Nelson Mandela understood this during South Africa's transition from apartheid, right? So they had they had enemies who had imprisoned him for 27 years, but he still understood that we needed their technical skills and we needed to negotiate. On the other hand, after the big political upheaval in Iraq, right? Of course, Saddam Hussein had been in power for so long that you had to get rid of everybody. But when you get rid of everybody, you got rid of a lot of the bad and the good with it and the technical skills with it, right? So this is a really complicated problem for our country. So we now have a situation where we need skilled human capital. So what should our strategy be? How do we actually make the economy run on a day-to-day basis?
So that's a very good question. So our problem is even more complicated than the one that Mandela faced in South Africa, in the sense that he had a solid, he reconciled with people who were, at least on the economic front, very competent. People who ran away in Bangladesh or people who were chased away in Bangladesh, to put bluntly, were not good. So in a sense, it's more complicated, but also simpler. So simpler because we don't need to reconcile with people who were not good. More complicated because we still need reconciliation. The reality in Bangladesh of last 15 years were that anybody who had to do anything in Bangladesh, whether in academia, in civil society, non-profits, or sort of international organizations who had to deal with Bangladesh, had to work with the regime. Therefore, there is no alternative to reconciliation. Individuals who ran away are, well, good riddance. They are not good. The last central bank governor, to put it bluntly, was not competent. Okay, so we need to find on a day-to-day basis to run the country. We absolutely need to rely on, and we're seeing this in practice, that a lot of people who had retired, so current central bank governor, for example, is way past retirement age in anywhere in the world, but he has stepped up because he is competent and he is able. It is the same with the current finance minister. It's the same with the current planning minister. So we are relying on people who are experienced, but also the reality is that not everyone who dealt with the last government were corrupt or incompetent. There are competent people who had to compromise with the last government for the reality of Bangladesh, and we have to bring them in. So, and I think, I hope, Mushfiq, that answers that sort of links politics with the economy as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was
reconciliation requires politics.
That was very helpful, and I think the whole audience in Bangladesh sitting here abroad, right? We all need to think carefully about, what compromises now are we willing to make, right? How much do we punish people? How much do we reconcile, etc. I don't have the answers, but like something to reflect on. So Nehad, let me turn to you. You use the word reforms a lot, an important word, right? So again, I'm going to ask you something very practical, right? Given that most of our audience is in Bangladesh, right? So what types of reforms are needed? Who is our main audience? So if you want to project macroeconomic stability, if you want to make people feel confident and comfortable in the country, who are the main stakeholders, right, externally? And here, I'm hoping you can provide the international perspective as well.
Sure, thanks, Mushfiq. So first, a statement about the link between the politics and the economy. And if it isn't clear to everyone, I'll again repeat it. This is a unique opportunity for the country to reset the social contract between the leaders and the constituents. That is easier said than done, but that is foundational to ensure that on a forward-looking basis, the institutions can deliver to that social contract. And so I don't have a practical recommendation of how to do that, but that's a key precondition to the other practical policies that will follow from it. In terms of how to induce the outcomes that we want, I think, very importantly, investors will care to see is that roadmap, the roadmap that demonstrates a clear identification of the problems and proposed policies that are implementable and reflect that political will to do that. And so whether we ask about the audience, whether it is external rating agencies, investors who are looking for the opening and deepening of domestic capital markets, foreign direct investors who will look for, to Abdullah's point, that there is the pool of domestic human capital that they need, and to Rubana's point about the transparency of the rules around investing in the country, all of these things need to be carefully sequenced in place to give that forward-looking confidence and predictability for investors and those who are making forecasts about the country. And those forecasters, aside from the agencies, include all of the banks that make forecasts about Bangladesh, all of the investors who will do that, and for that matter, even the global development financial institutions need all of that.
Thank you, Nehad. Thank you for staying concise. So the next question to Ms. Rubana Haq, right? So you use the word stability. So for business, for economics, we understand why that's important, right? And of course, that's an important word that, of course, Nehad also used a lot. Like that's what investors are looking for. But we just went through a revolution, and that revolution was also necessary. And revolutions necessitates the opposite of stability, right? We can't just wait and like coast along on stability, because then things don't change, right? And that was important. That was important economically, because we now have evidence that there were hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions, that were stolen from the country, right? And stability got us there, right? So the private sector, of course, wants that stability. Your buyers want that stability, investors want that stability, but change doesn't happen. So do you think in the past 15 years, the private sector played the right role, right? Were compromises made, and were they the right compromises? What should we be doing, just so this doesn't happen again? What should we be doing differently?
Mushfiq, by no means did private sector for the last 15 years side with the right side of history. I'll be very clear about that. Until date, and I'm very sorry to say this, but we keep on witnessing the same coin. So when I talk about the same coin, I'm sure you've read about this, that, there are wastes in the factory. And, before, the local mastans they used to belong to one party, and now the others are going. So for us, it's a very, very tricky terrain. We really don't know where to go, what to do. But of course, private sector also. I don't have to say this to you, but there are videos. There are absolute proofs of private sector really giving in to the public, and there were videos of them pledging diehard allegiance to the previous government. And today it's the same people who are going with the same flowers and same photo opportunity, and they're right there. So tell me, and the government is still engaging with them. So my point is, where does it change? How does it change? Who brings the change about? Maybe there aren't many people. I just heard Jyoti saying that, there are no, extra additional competent people there. I mean, I don't know, but there must be. For these people who have fled the country, I mean, many of us are now suffering because the banks are not opening LCs. One of the banks even refused to open back-to-back LC just because the original contract was a deferred contract. I mean, which buyer today, in today's day and age, opens at-site LC? Very few. And even if they do, they impose a discount. So for us, politics and business at this point were very unhealthily aligned. For 15 years, every business leader has actually gone into politics. Many. I would not say all, but some have. Some have served. If they served, wonderful. If they served their purpose. If they didn't, then all of them took advantage of that and just went their own way. As a result, the banks are completely depleted of funds. The banks have lost their credibility. Their ratings have suffered. So for us, what would work, Mushfiq, very honestly, is an immediate solution to this. Academia must join hands with the industry immediately. And, since the students have brought about that change, I'm sure there are brilliant students who can learn from the whole process, and they can be in the shadow tier and just follow it up. Maybe we should immediately have think tanks who will steer us through this process, because very honestly, Mushfiq, we are also, there are good people, or at least, better people in private sector who are tired of hearing, tired of being bashed by everyone saying that, you are the Rakto Chosha Maliks. That time has gone. We do employ a lot of people. So please, if we have done mistakes, correct us, teach us, guide us, but don't condemn us, don't shun us, because otherwise we will stay away from investment. Just a very quick thing I want to add here. The private sector has depended too much on ready-made garment sector. It is, Mr. Zaidi Sattar is in the audience because he just texted me. He is one big champion of sector diversification. So people should come together, and we must diversify our sector. Industrial relation must be priority one for everyone in the sector. Otherwise, we'll keep on hearing about, maltreatment of workers forever. And we'll have to spend the next 4 years just running between Hague and ILO trying to explain our position. And that should not be our case. Also, value addition for every product is the need of the hour. So for us, immediate academic intervention along with a robust industry would absolutely help. But let me also put it clear, we want the ministry to work. We just don't want secretaries to come and go. We just don't want the people who are in power to pick and choose secretaries because of their political alignments. They bring a lot of knowledge also. So let's all be fair, transparent, and move forward. It is time to move forward. My dear friend Abdullah is a great believer in Bangladesh. And Abdullah, absolutely, trade reforms are a must. And in economic complexity, Bangladesh has to do better. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much. So Abdullah, a very quick question for you, and then I want to turn it over to like audience questions. Okay. So so Dr. Yunus, our chief advisor, speaks about social business, right? So he's somebody who's in power right now, who has decision-making authority at the moment, right? And we could use this as an opportunity to create more interaction between government, NGOs, right? The private sector, right? So is there, so what role do you see in terms of cooperation between the NGO? So Bangladesh, as you know, is an unusual country in that NGOs do a lot more than they do in other countries.
No, thank you, Professor. I mean, clearly, Bangladesh has shown the world, I think, the value of tapping indeed its on its civil society organization. I think the like of BRAC and others are examples that the entire world will be looking at. So I think there is indeed opportunity here to pursue this opportunities, I think, of tapping the energy that we have in the broader society beyond what the public sector could deliver. As you know, when one look at the public sector in Bangladesh, revenue to GDP of 8% of GDP, extremely low, one of the lowest in the world. I think the only reason why Bangladesh has been able to achieve, I mean, level of development outcomes beyond what normally one could have seen simply by looking at revenue to GDP is because of the contribution of the NGOs and CSOs. So I think there is an opportunity here, I think, to work to make sure that there is a space where, especially young people, because we always talk about how we need to meet the needs of this very large population. We talk about how Bangladesh has opportunity to tap its demographic dividend. I think tapping that energy in the young people, making sure that they are not bystanders, that we look at, young people are there, we need to find strong firms and others to give them jobs. I think they need to be empowered. And if they can be empowered through, as you mentioned, social businesses, coming in with a wide range of services, that is certainly something that I think Bangladesh could pursue going forward. And we look forward to supporting the Indian government on this area.
Thank you. Let's move to some questions from the audience. Dr. Rumi Khan.
Hi, this is Dr. Rumi Khan. I will go a little bit off the economic topic and raise an issue that has been addressed, that has been asked by multiple people from many areas to the organizer, to the speaker, to the panelists. It is a question will be addressed to our respected speaker, Rubana Haq. I'll preface the question with one statement. I think this is the first time in history of human political upheaval after a government fell, starting from the top religious cleric, the head imam of the central mosque, to all the vice chancellors, all the principals, all the senior leadership of every institution, they did not only resign, they fled. They went into hiding, starting from top religious cleric in the country. And we have been seeing instances of teachers being removed, forcefully resigned. So there have been issues. The teachers have been aligned with the government and students were unhappy with them. Now my question is to respected Rubana Haq. I know that you have a stellar career as one of the brightest students, stood first in your all the school, high school, college exam, very bright columnist, bright business person. At the same
Don't embarrass
time,
me.
thank you. No, at the same time, you have been a vice chancellor in one of the most prestigious universities of Bangladesh. And that role, Bangladesh government had nothing to do. They could not do it. It was completely appointed by international consortium. But during the time when female students were being beaten, tortured, students have been killed during the time, they have not found you on their side as the only VC who can stand tall, who can talk about students. You have been silent, or you have been in support of the that regime. This is one question. You may say, yeah, I have a business to run. My business has 20, 30, 40,000 employees. I have to feed them. Then if you have to run a business, isn't it a conflict of interest to be a vice chancellor of a university while your job as a educational thought leader can get compromised to run your business? And also, a last question, you compared, we are replacing one chadabaj to another chadabaj. I think the comparison is a little bit offensive. Nobody is replacing a government that shoot students on the head. Nobody replaced, no other government in the history who killed, who airstrike, got on the own civilian population. Only Assad did, Saddam Hussein did, Gaddafi did. They did airstrike on civilian population. This is the government. So this government doesn't have any comparison. And we have not seen you on our side throughout the movement. And that is the question many people has brought to us. The organizers have faced this question multiple times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll quickly answer your question, not because I'm being defensive, but because I want to answer you properly. So number one, Asian University for Women is an international university. We have students from 17 different countries. I, as a VC, was not the sole decider on the action. We just kept quiet. Our students had to say what they said within, because we are residential, within the four walls. They did not go out because there was massive fighting on the streets. And if one foreign student got hit, we would be closed forever. I will have to tell you that we were facing an agency investigation right before 5th of August. So we were under extreme scrutiny. So I could not have risked the lives of the students. Number two, as far as I am concerned, I don't look after my businesses. My son is 40 years old, my daughter is 38, and the youngest is 32. All three of them look after the business. I don't. So I just overview when they get stuck, when they really need a direction, only then I go in. And that too, I mean, I haven't been looking after the business for at least the last 6 to 7 years. So my role as a vice chancellor is not compromised because of a family business, which is run by my children. That's number two. And number three, if you talk about, so why was I silent? Well, I was actually not silent. Thank God for that, because otherwise you would have said something. Number one, I was in Shohid Minar. Thank God I did not go in front of media. That is something that I did. I did not go in front of media, and luckily my friends kept the photographs. So I did not post on social media because I don't have Facebook. I closed down my Twitter account because very honestly, I tweeted once and I said, we are ashamed, in regret and everything. And that was way before Sheikh Hasina left the country. And under that, basically, I'm not a very thick-skinned person. There were lots of comments. Some people said, somebody, I'm sure you know Saad Hammadi. Saad said, Rubana, at least you have spoken. And under that, there were just so many things. I mean, they were just saying that, you are a beneficiary of the system, you are a vice chancellor appointed by the prime minister, and everything that really didn't make sense. I closed my Twitter account down. But today I will open it up just to prove to you that I did not keep silent. My Instagram account, my Twitter account, all of them were filled with definite postings. But unfortunately, I don't have Facebook. I have deactivated it when I went into BGMEA and never opened it. So I could not say anything, because you also have to understand my point that my private, well, Instagram is not public, but my Twitter is public. And in my Twitter account, there is absolutely clearly, I tweeted, and I will send you a screenshot of that, and I will activate it today, and then you can curse me as much as you can. But as far as I'm concerned, I did my conscience no wrong. I stand on the right side of history, and I am so sorry that you faced questions because you invited me to the panel. Thank you very much.
So I'm glad we're having open conversations, and this should be an ongoing conversation. Revolutions don't come easy, right? We all have to take stock of what has happened, what will happen going forward, and we also need to learn from our history. So I hope this conversation continues. So thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for answering the question as well. Next question.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you for this event. My name is Nima Namdari. I'm from Iran, and I'm board fellow at Yale this year. This event is very inspiring, especially the previous panel. I was a leader of sit-in movement 20 years ago in Iran, and I was a political prisoner. And that video, the student was singing, it was so touching. It was so touching, and I couldn't hold my tears. I have two quick questions. First, during that revolution, the private sector, the companies in private sector, did they any support to the students, to the protesters? Because I'm asking this because in Iran, I'm owner of, co-founder and a CEO of two fintech companies right now in Iran. And we have lots of movement and mobilization during this year in Iran. And always government told us to seizing the ownership of our companies. And we are in middle of two pressures from the society to be supportive, be more supportive, and from the government to be passive, do not involve in the protest. I'm curious, is there any the same experience in Bangladesh? I want to know about that. And also in Iran, we have a kind of semi-public companies. They are companies registered private, but they are owned by the government, and they are, I think 25% of GDP in Iran is from those companies. They're huge. They have a key role in the economy. Is there anything similar in Bangladesh? And if yes, what you will cope with that after the revolution? Thank you.
Let me take one more question at the same time and then turn it over to the panelists.
Thank you. Ahmed. What keeps me up at night these days is the worry about the banking crisis. So the banks are pretty much empty. They've been looted at rates that are just extraordinary in terms of history. But the gap that we face in terms of capitalization of the banks is extremely severe. And if it's not addressed, there's going to be a run on the banks. Currently, Bangladesh Bank is providing short-term liquidity to most of these banks, sort of barely keeping them afloat, but that's not sustainable. So regardless of which model we follow, whether we do we move distressed assets into a bad bank model or any other avenue, there is really no path forward without recapitalization of some of these banks. Because if you let the giant banks like Islamic Bank fail, Islamic Bank is the size of Charlie Bank. If it fails, there's going to be absolute chaos in the country. And even allowing many of the smaller banks to fail will cause a run on the banks. So the question is, when the Treasury is bankrupt, when perhaps we can pull maybe $5, $8, maybe $10 billion from the IMF and other channels, how do we escape this without printing money? And if you do print money, where do you go when you're already at double-digit inflation, right? It's going to get so much worse. So I'm curious to hear what thoughts panel has on where this is headed.
So Jyoti, can you take that question very quickly? A quick answer to the banking question.
Okay. Yes, I can. Thank you. Yes, it's as I said upfront, it's a vexed issue, right? Yes, you have characterized it very spot on that capitalization is needed, true. And we cannot have inflation, so we cannot print money. So what that basically means is that the other macro policy settings would have to be, I hate to use the word austerity, so I will not use that. I would say the way, sort of the IMF types would say, recalibration of fiscal policy, okay? So that's one side. The other side here is that if remittances continue and without wading into the specific issues being faced by the garment sector right now, if remittances continue and if we can get garment production back online, then macroeconomy will have support from those two drivers. And that should, in theory, allow fiscal policy to take the backstage, and monetary policy to adjust the sort of monetary support for the banks. The other thing is that some people will have to lose their money. Okay, you cannot have a banking crisis resolved without somebody getting a haircut. Given the change in politics, that somebody hopefully will be the big business that bankrolled the last regime. That's the way to put it. Okay, when you have a banking crisis, who could lose their money? The small depositors, lenders, borrowers. Given the revolution, it probably would be. I hope that it would be the big businesses that bankrolled the last regime. Okay.
Okay. So one final thing. So we're behind time, but let me. I see Mr. Rubana Haq's hand is up. So you heard the question from our friend from Iran about the role of the private sector. But I should also say, many questions are coming in. We won't have time to get to all of it, but I wanted to give you a flavor that this comment about, this is a question from Shama Mirza, this comment about equating Chadabad with the previous regime, that did rub a lot of people the wrong way, right? A regime that ran Ainagar, torture chambers, etc., just isn't in the same league, right? I just want you to know that many people in the audience have had that reaction, but maybe you can tell us about the positive and negative contributions of the private sector, please.
No, I just wanted to clarify one point. I think the gentleman who questioned me said that I talked about the coin. I talked about the coin with regard to the waste being generated in the factory. It's called jute. So, earlier one party was taking it and now the other party is coming to take it. So by no means I meant the revolution and the outcome of the political parties or the other platforms. I only meant it with regard to the jute situation. So please, let's not get confused about it. This revolution has changed our lives, has changed our perception and everything. And as private sector, I cannot speak about everyone else, but many people have also come to the support of the student community. Many people did not want to be named because of, multiple sensitivities, but we are all accountable to our own conscience. And before we are entrepreneurs, we are human beings. So I just want you to understand, by no means did I imply that the student revolution is the other side of the coin. What I was saying is that there are political parties who have traditionally ruled Bangladesh, who are again taking turns and doing the same thing to the industry and the sector. So that's what I meant. Thank you. I hope I'm clear.
Okay. So let me just take one last question because we're now 20 minutes past. Sushant, and even better if it's more of a comment than a question, so we don't have to go back and forth.
Actually, a very quick question. Would there be economic consequences of tense diplomatic ties with India? I'm looking at what the Adani Group, the power sector, and other things, and India being the second biggest trading partner for Bangladesh in Asia.
Yes. So let me actually just in the interest of time say that I'm gonna it's like a ping pong game. I'm gonna throw it right back at you, which is in the last session you will be speaking about India-Bangladesh relations. And what I'd like you to add another dimension to is the private sector in India, in addition to our official government-to-government relations. Yeah. All right. So with that, let me close for now. But of course, in the room, people should be talking to each other during the coffee break. And what we'll do is we'll just take instead of the scheduled 15-minute break, let's take a 5-minute break. We can go out and get some snacks and coffee quickly and bring it back into the room, please. Okay. Thanks very much to your panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nehad, Abdoulaye, Jyoti, Rubana, for participating and from various parts of the world and for openly sharing your views with the audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.